So our first speaker is Justice Greg Hobbs, who will address the use of water data in U.S. and international water law. Justice Hobbs was appointed by Governor Roy Romer to the Colorado Supreme Court on April 18, 1996, and is near the beginning of a second 10-year term. He has practiced law for 25 years with an emphasis on water, environment, land use, and transportation. He is Vice President of the Colorado Foundation for Water Education and co-convener of Dividing the Waters. In addition, he is a published author creating the Public's Water Resource, articles on water law, history, and culture, and Living the Four Corners, Colorado Centennial State at the Headwaters. Justice Hobbs was educated at Notre Dame and UC Berkeley, and on a personal note served with his wife Bobby in the Peace Corps in South America. He is proud father of 2 and grandfather of 5.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Well, I'm pleased to be here, and I thank Patty Reddick for the invitation. Patty's archives had a paper that I wrote in 1984 called The Green Mountain Reservoir Lock or Key, and Congressman McGinnis, running for governor, took 4 pages of it without attribution. Someone tipped the Denver Post or merely went to the archives, found the paper, ran a program against Congressman McGinnis's supposed learned water essay, and it turned out to be my work. And the story ran for about 4 straight days on the front page of the Denver Post. And some of you know the rest. He lost the primary. He was the leading Republican candidate. And it's actually interesting to learn that theft of another person's work is still an issue. So many interesting spinoffs from that. People suggested that I ought to have part of that $300,000 that he got from a foundation for writing these series of water articles. I never got a cent of it and wouldn't want it. Believe strongly in the archives, and all of my papers were boxed up when we moved to temporary quarters when our old courthouse was taken down. There was a new courthouse being built. I shipped them all up to Patty. She came down in 2 separate trips and took them out in boxes. You never know what can happen, though, when these things actually get visible again, see? So crediting sources not only goes to the credibility of your own work when you use other people's work. Actually, I think you lose something when you try to make it your own and you don't cite people like Don Worster, which of course I've done in a number of law review articles and publications, and all the other arenas that play into water. Now, I am the co-convener of the Water Judges Educational Project, Dividing the Waters, and we have a national group of state and federal judges. Our next meeting is in St. Louis in 2 weeks, where we meet periodically and bring a faculty in and don't talk about individual cases, how should we decide it? Not that. But we learn from people about the lay of the land, if you will. These great watersheds, how they operate, how we share the very limited water resources, how the environmental issues, endangered species issues come to play. And all of this, as you know, is can be intense conflict, but it also can be an opportunity to bring to bear the resources of scholarship, of common sense. And I'm actually going to start with an historical map here. Because you got to remember that a state like Colorado carved out of the public domain, right, out of the Louisiana Purchase of 1803 and the Guadalupe-Hidalgo Treaty of 1848. That's the land of Colorado. It's basically all federal land, except for that pink area down there, which are the land grants. Under the 1848 Treaty of Guadalupe-Hidalgo, we had to recognize the land grants after the boundaries were established by a claims commission. The green areas are the national forests. None other than the great President Roosevelt came out and stayed on the west slope in the Colorado Hotel. You can still buy a teddy bear there, named after him. And his thesis was that we need to preserve the forested watersheds because that is the future of the West. Sustainable supply of timber and of water for the settlers of the West. That was the thesis of the Organic Act that started these original forest reserves. So those are the original forest reserves. By the way, what is this map? 1902 Land Office map. And it shows the places where after you'd lived on the homestead, 160 acres, for 5 years, if you're able to survive, you went in and, you proved it up and you got the title to the service, basically, a patent. But the water was severed from the public domain by the U.S. Congress through the 1866 Mining Act. So the water was made available by the Congress to the states and territories to allocate under their own system of law. And so what really grew up in Colorado and other western states was actual beneficial use by people who could actually use the water. Now, the people that founded our state and other western states were anti-monopolistic and anti-speculative in nature. What do I mean by that? They didn't want the riparian water law of the East because only the landowners along the banks of the stream could use the water. All right? And then they really had to turn it back in because there's correlative rights upstream and downstream, and it was mostly for water power, maybe incidental domestic use. Well, to make this land, sellable, and that was the national agenda, of course, you had to take water from the stream and get it to a farm. So our very first territorial year, 1861, the Colorado legislature recognizes that if you take water from the stream to a farm, and only agricultural use was mentioned in this first water law in Colorado, because that's what really consumed the water. The miners were up in the mountains, and any water they used came right back to the water course. But the farmers needed a consumptive use for their crops. So these ditches, much like the acequias in northern New Mexico, and there were 350 of them in New Mexico by the mid-1800s, these direct flow ditches grew up along the Platte and the Arkansas. Okay, what else do we have here? The Indian reservations, the Ute Mountain Ute, the Southern Ute. There were 4 bands of the Ute in this western area here, but Nathan Meeker, the Indian agent, was killed because he plowed up the horse track that the Utes, they loved horses, they were horse people. He tried to turn them into farmers because that was the national agenda. Everybody's going to be a farmer, including the Indians. They took exception to it and drove a stake through his throat. It was hard to breathe after that. The 4 bands of the Utes that were in that part of the reservation were shipped to Utah. The land was put back in the public domain for settlement. So all this territory, from Montrose through Grand Junction, was all put back in the public domain for homesteading. And the Native Americans end up perched here, the Ute Mountain Ute and the Southern Ute, right at the very corner of our state. Now that's important because, as it turns out, when those reservations are created, 1868, the Peace Commission, right after the Civil War, they get an implied reserve water right for the water they needed for their future with the date of the reservation. These farmers that cut these direct flow ditches, they get a date from the time they put the water to actual beneficial use. Since the water's scarce, it's in priority. In our state, for example, the Union colonies established 1870 at the confluence of the Poudre and the Platte. 1874, the new settlers at Camp Collins, the surplus Army camp, take the entire flow of the river upstream. The Greelyites come up, and Greeley, we now know it as, and say, what's the deal here? We were here first, and we're dependent upon this for our food supply. Well, that was locked into the Constitution of Colorado in 1876. It's an on-the-ground notice that if you're using the water beneficially, that part of the consumptive use which you need to grow something, whether it's a crop or a city, belongs to you. The return flow goes back to the stream or the aquifers, and in order of priority, people then can appropriate the needed water. In Colorado, we can only consume 1/3 of the water that arises in our state because of 9 interstate compacts, 2 U.S. Supreme Court decrees, and the Republic of Mexico, the 1944 treaty. So we can only consume 1/3 of the water, and that's our water budget. So whatever's in a year by precipitation, average 16 million acre feet, the year 2000, 2002, 2003, 4 million acre feet. It's all we had in that huge drought. Most of it had to go out of state to satisfy the interstate compacts. We were living on reservoir storage. We used 6 million acre feet of water storage, came within 500,000 total feet of exhausting our total active supply. So this is a critical resource. Our Supreme Court takes the appeals from 7 water courts in major watershed jurisdictions directly to us, bypasses the Court of Appeals. The 7 of us decide water cases every year. This has happened since 1872. So there's this huge body of case law, which is all now available on the electronic research to track the evolution of this doctrine. Now, we treat tributary groundwater as part of the surface stream, okay? Some other states don't do that. These resources are hydraulically connected, and a lot of these mountain plain streams, the surface water depends upon the tributary groundwater. So if you allow junior pumpers to come in and deplete the water, you're depleting the surface stream. You're not only interfering with senior agricultural rights, but we also now have in-stream flow rights. We have kayak course rights. We have cities, businesses. So if you interrupt the hydraulic connection and you're not in priority, then you're affecting somebody else's water use right. So we handle changes of water rights in the court. Now, we are over-appropriated in 3 of our 4 major basins. There's no new water supply available in the Platte, the Arkansas, or the Rio Grande Basin. Maybe just a little bit in the Colorado River Basin under our share of the Upper Basin and 1922 Colorado River compacts. That's going to be very expensive water because it's going to have to be stored in really good water years. So these senior water rights are extremely valuable. They can be transferred on the market between willing buyer and willing seller. Usually the buyer is a city or an environmental group. Now, why are the environmental groups in here? They're trying to preserve these big hay meadows and farms to keep them in open space and to keep the water on the land for the local economy and for wildlife, and they can be donated in whole or part to the Water Conservation Board for in-stream flow to re-water segments of the stream. So in the water court, we need to know how these water rights were historically used, beneficially used. And there's a quantification made of the actual beneficial consumptive use over a representative historical time period. Good water years, average water years, poor water years. Direct flow into the ditch is taken out and transferred only by changing it to acre feet of consumptive use, because that's the burden on the public's water resource. And the doctrine is the public always owns the water. The public and private entities can only get a use right in the public's resource. Now, this is really all in the public, most of this action, because the only private water rights we really have in a state like Colorado are the farmers. They happen to hold the senior water rights. The rest of this is local communities, conservancy districts, water and sanitation districts, you know, the ski areas, they make snow, you know, to advance our ski season to Thanksgiving. I mean, all of that kind of thing. So our multi-purpose economy that now includes recreation and restoration of the environment, preservation of the environment, all depends upon this system. So what do we need? We obviously need good hydrology and technical data about the groundwater surface water interconnection with the water rights laid upon them and how the change of the water right would affect other water rights and stream levels. Okay? So a lot of this is done now by modeling. So models are big. Aerial photographs are very important. What was the extent of the irrigated area? These maps are important. Where did the ditch run? Field inspection is critical. You know, the lay of the land. Hey, a map's just as good as, you know, it's done accurately, right, and reflects the conditions that existed then and now. But we have a lot more tools. The legal profession is just a piece of this. They're the communicators actually to the court, you know. But the really important people are the experts that appear in court and get to opine on the ultimate issues that are before the judge, right? I mean, it's a very honored situation. Now, you're not supposed to be a hired gun when you do this. You're supposed to bring your professional integrity to the table as a biologist, an engineer, you know, a modeler, whatever piece of this science that, hey, by the way, if the law doesn't respect the natural hydrology in science, the law is an ass. It doesn't work. You can't have a system of law that doesn't respect the actual resource that you're allocating and distributing. So there's a lot of information and data and analysis and graphs and charts and exhibits that need to be drawn up so lay people like me, history major from Notre Dame, poet before I was a lawyer and judge, can understand. Remember, these decisions are made by lay people. Local city councils, county commissioners, state legislators, administrative judges, judges like me on trial courts and appellate courts. Now we have to judge the credibility of the experts, right? How does it sound? Does it make sense? How in the conflict of experts does the proximate truth, I'm going to use that term, because you're always reconstructing fact, right? Always reconstructing fact, historical or whatever else, to summarize and communicate, get as close as you can to it. Now, we have been concerned about the hired gun syndrome, so we adopted a rule last year that requires every expert that's going to appear in water court to fill out an affidavit that their testimony and reports are their own. They may get comments from somebody else, but that they adopt this as their own work. All right? It's not supposed to be ghostwritten by attorneys or rewritten, right? Or changed because the client doesn't like the outcome. So we view this as a way to protect the process as well as the experts themselves from undue pressure, because we want to hear their professional opinion. That's why they have a favored status. All right? So, since there's hardly any new water, it's all old water spoken for, the change of these rights from one use to another use, from one location to another location, from direct flow to storage, all of that is extremely important. Demand management and conservation is obviously an incredible part of this. Who has the money? The federal government isn't building the reclamation projects anymore, right? And they were only doing this for part of the community anyway. So it's local water user, typically municipal or water district ratepayers, or property taxes, or both. Okay, so the money for these mitigations that are required because of the federal environmental process that overlays all of this can be incredible, as you know. Because this state water law system is now overlain by Federal Reserve water rights for national parks and monuments and Indian tribes. Their dates have to be adjudicated. They are often senior to the settlers who came along later. The lay of where these ditches are. By the way, when people move in from California or the East, they see a ditch going through the backyard, they think of one of two things, right? We can pump the water out and use it, or we can fill in the ditch. Guess what? Two things you can't do. Neither of those. Because the ditch is a valuable right-of-way that is integrally tied to the water right to get the water to where it has been used and needs to be used. So our law protects and grants a private right of condemnation against other private property to have the crossing for a pipeline or ditch and for the operation and maintenance. Now, if it's public land and 1/3 of this land is public in Colorado, you need to get a FLIPMA right-of-way, right? Bureau of Land Management permission or Forest Service permission to cross the federal ground. And then you invoke the Environmental Policy Act, and the Endangered Species Act, the Clean Water Act, dredge and fill, and all of this. So all I'm going to say to you, I will stand for questions, but we got other panel members. This is an exciting field. I hire wonderful people who usually have just gotten out of law school. They're much better at electronic research than I am. So, they find what's there. The more you add, the better, the data. But I usually tell them right away, the Denver Public Library is that way, the CSU Water Archives are that way. Get there! And look at some of these old books and reports. You'd be amazed how many times you can actually go back to, the books of the four great surveyors, Hayden, Powell, Wheeler, and King. the Bureau of Reclamation documents, Corps of Engineers, all this stuff is just laden with technical data, exhibits, maps, on-the-ground stuff, you know, the Newell report, you know, all of this stuff. So digitize, digitize, digitize. Make it available. I hate these sites where they say you have to pay to read the professor's article. Guess what I don't do? I don't read it! You know, I don't have the money, my court doesn't have the money to do that. So public access is very important. Now, maybe the consultants, you know, or hired can pay that. But when I'm sitting there with my law clerks, we're going to look at publicly available resources. Can I read my one poem that I thought that's okay, because this, I think, describes your mission in this gathering. Circumference. We gather here to learn and celebrate, to greet dear friends and meet new ones, to recognize those among us who have gained our admiration for the circumference of their views and the bounty of their good-natured insight. In this treasured land of scarcity and opportunity, we seek the wealth of learning from each other, the strength of understanding what we cannot know alone, to honor our differences, avoid rancor, bridge difficulties, welcome one another's accomplishments. And when the prairie morning peeps into the eastern sky, and when the mountain evening breaks a westerly glow, when unexpected storms crack our certitude and drought parches our creativity, then may the waters from your source to our mouths bless, keep, and sustain us. Congratulations on your conference. Thank you.